history. If you think about it, it's worth noting that 100% of the whole history of the world is written ex post facto. Ex post facto is a Latin term which means after the fact. No one is documenting history along events develop and unfold. And with it, you understand the saying that history is written by the victors. This aspect is crucial for comprehending how historical narratives and traditions endure through the ages and were passed down to us today. I'd like also to discuss a recurring phenomenon throughout history where individuals are subjugated by a more advanced civilization, be it intellectually, culturally, technologically, or a combination thereof. One such occurrence took place around the 6th to 5th century BCE when Babylon invaded the land of Canaan. In the year 603 BCE, during the reign of King Zedekiah of Judah, a rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon ensued. Responding swiftly, the Babylonian king besieged the capital city of Jerusalem. Eventually, between 598 and 597 BCE, Jerusalem fell, and its inhabitants, the Judahites, were deported to Babylon. This event marked the beginning of a period known as the Babylonian captivity of the Jews. Why did Babylon exile the Jews? It was a typical imperial strategy. Conquering empires often deported subjugated populations, relocating elites to capital cities and commoners to the empire's periphery. This practice was widespread in ancient times, aimed at controlling foreign-conquered aristocracy while leveraging common settlements for border defense. The Jews were forcibly dispersed among Babylonian cities but found themselves essentially free. In this new environment, they encountered amazing Babylonian libraries, which left them astonished and baffled. It's important to note that the people of the Kingdom of Judah were quite close-minded in their beliefs. They firmly held that they were the center of creation, with everything revolving around them as God's chosen people. However, their encounter with Babylon exposed them to bigger palaces, bigger temples, bigger infrastructure, and larger populations. Moreover, with the libraries, they learned about the world before the flood. All of this presenting a profound cultural shock to them. In those libraries, they delved into the intricate details of two major socio-political systems that existed in the pre-flood world. One was a government led by 10 kings, while the other operated under 7 kings, both systems distinct and separate from each other. However, these systems were later depicted in the Book of Genesis as patriarchal bloodline governments, rather than their original forms. They encountered pre-Diluvian terms like Adamu, representing mankind, and Kava, its term female form, later recorded in Genesis as Adam and Eve. Additionally, they learned about a celestial serpent associated with knowledge, timekeeping, and surviving cataclysmic events. This serpent's concept was intertwined with various historical narratives, including the appearance of a group known as the Anunnaki, who were called as masters of the underworld. When they emerged, they built Edens across the Middle East. Narratives like the tale of Adam and Eve in Eden are fiction, Jewish inventions created on top of recorded history and core facts. For instance, Adin is a Sumerian term denoting a walled enclosure similar to a defensible city. The Jews in Babylon redacted stories, and those come to us today in the form of the Book of Genesis. Another common error involves the misunderstanding of the Sumerian pre-flood term char. Even in the 20th century, esteemed, well-read academic authors, known for meticulous archaeological research, overlooked the correct interpretation of this term when it comes to timekeeping systems. They erroneously considered a char to represent a year, but in reality, it denoted a day. Why a day? Because in the pre-flood era, there was no sun in the sky. What? No sun in the sky? Yes. In the pre-flood world, the mesosphere was incredibly dense, concealing the sun from view permanently. During the daytime, sunlight diffused through this thick mist, casting a pervasive purple hue. At night, the vapor canopy acted as a lens, enabling naked-eye observation of stars that today are invisible without a telescope. This era was marked by matriarchal societies where the goddess was revered, with the moon serving as a central motif. In this particular setting, the biosphere was quite different. Elevated atmospheric pressure resulted in heightened levels of oxygen, CO2, and increased ambient radiation. These factors created an environment leading to the existence of megafauna, including mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, giant insects, and of course, giant reptiles and titans. Giant reptiles, today, are named as dinosaurs by academia. Titans are simply humans who, in this unique context, grew to astonishing sizes. Suddenly, it becomes clear why the world was perceived as a garden and paradise. In such conditions, food was abundant everywhere. However, it also becomes apparent why communities felt the need to construct the so-called Edens to ensure their survival. Even insects regarded humans as prey in this environment. The vapor canopy period lasted 1656 years, from 3895 BCE until 2239 BCE. 3895 BCE from our calendar is the year 1 of the Anno Mundi calendar, and it is the year of the Adam and Eve Genesis creation story. But, using Scripture to interpret Scripture, it represents in itself a reset and wipeout of a previous civilization in a cataclysm so huge that survivors regarded it as the creation of a new heaven and a new earth. New Earth is the lithospheric displacement, continental quakes and oceans defying their beds, while the new heaven is the formation of the vapor canopy resulting of intense volcanism. Once it came to rest, survivors found themselves in the pre-flood era and started civilization anew. The Char unit of measurement traces its origins back to this epoch, the vapor canopy era, the antediluvian period where time was measured from evening to evening, but fell into disuse. Following the catastrophic collapse of the vapor canopy in 2239 BCE, famously known as the Great Flood, or the Day the Sky Fell, civilization underwent profound changes, including adjustments to their timekeeping practices. Now there is a burning disk in the sky. With its presence in the daytime sky and a significantly depleted mesosphere, at night only a handful of stars remained visible to the naked eye. This made the Sun King. Civilization found itself experiencing distinct seasons, prompting a shift in the timekeeping system to cycles of 360 days based on observations of the sun. This is evident in the Sumerian pantheon, where a notable example is the introduction of a new deity towards the end of Sumerian history, when the Sumerian pantheon was already old and well established. They introduced Utu, recognized by the Babylonians as Shamash. This was the sun god. Eventually became known as Utu Shamash. He was the final addition to the Sumerian pantheon, serving as the god of the sun. At the same time, the Egyptian Ennead had long been firmly established with its gods, who were ancient. However, following what academia labels as the First Intermediate Period, which in reality corresponded to the Great Flood that devastated Egypt, although Egyptologists refrain from acknowledging intermediate periods as civilization resets or setbacks, an addition to their pantheon also occurred. As Egypt's society began to recover from the cataclysmic event, a new deity was introduced into the pantheon: Horus, the son of the sun, who was not worshipped before. In ancient America, the Mesoamericans record the conclusion of an age, known as the Water Sun Age. Following the flood, the patriarchal era was born as the goddess figure became antagonized. Despite the traumatic nature of the deluge, its impact, along with remnants of the pre-flood world, left indelible marks on the land, its inhabitants, and collective memory. This cataclysmic event became ingrained in Babylonian folklore, history, and popular beliefs, profoundly shaping subsequent culture. For example, Abraham's birth occurred around 1948 BCE, nearly 3 centuries after the flood. Abraham was a Chaldean, a Babylonian born in Ur. The syllabus taught to young adults that time centered around the pre-flood world. It's natural that Abraham followed Babylonian tradition and worshipped the Babylonian gods, as his forefathers did before him. Throughout his life, he never fully relinquished the beliefs instilled in him since childhood. He inevitably grew up familiar with tales of creation, the loss of paradise, the deluge, and the periodically appearance of a great dragon in the sky, linked both to creation, 3895 BCE, and the deluge, 2239 BCE. These accounts were widely known among Babylonians. In parallel, we are told that Moses wrote the Torah, encompassing Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The Torah includes accounts of Abraham's life. Yet, contemporary scholarship views the book as originating primarily during the Babylonian captivity in the 6th century BCE, drawing from pre-existing written and oral traditions and undergoing final revisions during the Persian post-exilic period in the 5th century BCE and not during Moses' days. As mentioned previously, this redaction process of ancient traditions led to inaccuracies and misplaced chronological settings in historical accounts. A notable example is the Tower of Babel narrative, which, contrary to popular belief, did not take place in Babylon. This story actually predates the Babylonian era, originating from the pre-Diluvian period. Upon closer examination, it becomes evident that what we encounter in the Old Testament has been borrowed, edited, and incorporated into biblical texts. Moreover, the primary source of this information can be traced back to the Babylonian culture. Let's delve deeper into the opening verses of the book of Genesis and explore what biblical scholars refer to as the gap theory. The apparent creation event described in Genesis 1:1 states, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Then Genesis 1:2 follows, describing the earth as a formless void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Finally, in Genesis 1:3, God said, "Let there be light." This suggests a temporal gap, an interval between these verses. For this deep, the Hebrew term is Tehom, which derives from the older Semitic Babylonian Assyrian term Tiamat, the dragon of chaos. Tiamat is an ancient word that predates the Genesis text itself. Hebrew scholars alongside understood that the word Tehom to also be derivative of hom, which means to roar or to rage. We should consider the Babylonian concept that we dwell beneath a vast cosmic ocean. The sky represents an ocean, the waters above, implying that the underground is likewise a vast ocean. As above, so below. Positioned in the middle, the earth is surrounded by water, and Tiamat, the ultimate source of all created things, was positioned in the sky above. In Genesis chapters 1-3, we find a depiction of the world's renewal. First, God completes the creation of the world. That's done, finished. Then, sometime later, a great tumult and upheaval occur, resulting in chaos and emptiness on the earth, akin to the concept of Tiamat's roar and rage. What we witness here is the arrival of a celestial object, heralding the disruption of a pre-antiquity ancient world's natural order. Following this upheaval, we see a renewal of the earth, a new natural order regarding the day, night, birds, plants, insects, fish, animals, and human survivors. Additionally, the narrative describes the formation of the two lights, the lesser light, given by the moon in the night sky, and the greater light, representing the diffused sunlight through the vapor canopy sky. The tale of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, the serpent, the tree of knowledge, the tree of life, all of these narratives stem from a singular event that isn't the work of God but of something else. Consequently, this is the temporal gap between the original creation and the renewal of the earth. This is the gap theory. By linking the biblical narratives with their Babylonian parent texts, we paint a picture suggesting that the Adam and Eve story represents a complete collapse of civilization infrastructure due to a celestial appearance, which resulted in the eradication of a previous world populated by cities and people. During Abraham's days, this was the state and extent of Babylonian knowledge. This is what was passed from generation to generation, recounting a world bustling with cities, teeming with people and advanced technology, which ended up starting the Vapor Canopy period, literally, on a new land under a new sky. Babylonians also knew that this period came to an end, 1656 years later, in the event we know of the Deluge of Noah. 1,000 years after Abraham, the Jews, held captive in Babylon, tried to put all this together. How do we ascertain this? Simply by examining the book of Genesis. The initial 5 chapters of Genesis represent the Jewish attempt to interpret and make sense of the ancient Babylonian texts, centuries after those texts were wrote, and more than 3 millennia after the event itself they are trying to establish. And those ancient Babylonian texts themselves were written after the Great Flood, which itself led to the loss of a significant amount of knowledge. Still, Abraham, along with the entirety of Babylonian culture, was aware that they weren't the initial inhabitants of the earth. They recognized themselves as at least the 3rd civilization. Understanding that the first civilization experienced an infrastructure collapse in the starting of the Vapor Canopy period. The 2nd civilization surged and endured through this era, and after the deluge, they entered into their own, a 3rd civilization. All of these civilizations emerged from the remnants of the preceding ones, just like a phoenix. The Babylonians also had knowledge of a period spanning 1,200 years, equivalent to 432,000 turnings of the stars or chars, before the deluge, during which 10 kings ruled. 120 years each. 12 centuries prior to Noah's Great Flood, there exists the account of the Gihon flood during the Vapor Canopy period in 3439 BCE that killed 1/3 of the Adamu, mankind. What unfolded in the aftermath of that flood? The greatest benefactor of humanity emerged onto the stage. Enki and the 50 Anuna, who followed him, appeared and brought forth civilization. Even contemporary historians, anthropologists, and archaeologists agree that civilization began by the 35th century BCE. Everything from urban planning, vast canal works, agriculture, writing, architecture, engineering, animal husbandry, shipping guilds, roads, cartography, cosmetics, and more, all the essentials for a civilized and organized society didn't simply appear. They exploded simultaneously across the world. Indeed, the Anuna were the fallen angels, originated from a world that faced destruction, banishment, and a fall. Possessing extensive knowledge, they were akin to gods. When we consider the concept of fallen angels, we are essentially looking through a lens of primitivism at what an ancient people perceived as a lost, highly advanced civilization. It's only natural that they would be documented in the Bible as fallen and regarded as angels. So, what transpired? This group, the Anunnaki, were survivors, most likely the elite of the civilization that ended in the Adam and Eve reset. They resided in the underworld for a long time, their infrastructure remaining intact. Upon their return from the underworld, one group, the group led by Enki, also known as Enoch in the Judeo-Christian version, began inhabiting these Edens, walled enclosures, fortresses typically situated in mountainous regions. Subsequently, they commenced disseminating some of their technologies and knowledge to the people who survived on the surface, living a Neolithic lifestyle. The Adam and Eve story clearly signifies the conclusion of an era of civilization advancement. Following this event, humanity regressed to a state resembling animals, akin of what academia describes as the Neolithic period. Also, This Genesis story represents a simplistic interpretation of a far more intricate phenomenon that unfolded in the wake of the civilization reset in 3895 BCE. 270 years after this upheaval, humanity on the surface still hadn't recovered. They were stuck in a state of future shock, experienced a complete collapse of infrastructure, now living in small groups similar to animals. Under such circumstances, life revolved solely around securing food and shelter. After a few generations, they regressed to the point where metaphorically they became naked due to their loss of knowledge. How do we know that this period of psychological trauma lasted for 270 years? Because we have two ancient traditions that allude to it. In the book of Jasher, before the Gihon flood, we found that for 270 years, humans existed in a state of innocence, but in the 270th year, they started rebelling. This intriguing concept is also present in the Japanese Way of the Gods mythos. According to ancient Japanese traditions, there was a time when humans enjoyed abundance and lived in harmony with nature. And here, too, this period lasted 270 years before humanity rebelled against the gods. So, what occurred, and what does this rebellion signify? Approximately 270 years after a complete systemic collapse, humanity on the surface, the Adamu, encountered other humans. These individuals were adorned with clothing, garments, weaponry, armor, medicine, utensils, and more. These were the first Anuna encountered before Enki. Prior to Enki's intervention, the first Anuna were enslaving the people they encountered on the surface. Despite being humans like you and I, they were revered as gods due to their advanced technologies. The Adamu's frame of reference was too limited and regressed to comprehend them otherwise. In this case, this led to subjugation and slavery, representing one possible extreme of the cargo cult phenomenon, as discussed earlier. This phenomenon occurs when an advanced people comes into contact with an underdeveloped one. The term cargo cult originated from one of the final instances of this phenomenon, which occurred during World War II when Americans constructed bases in South Pacific islands such as Micronesia, Polynesia, and Melanesia. Indigenous people on these islands began to worship the Americans by observing their rituals. For instance, they noticed that when a man waved a flag on a runway, an airplane would subsequently land or airdrop supplies, ranging from military equipment to cigars and chocolates. Lacking any frame of reference, the indigenous people viewed the Americans as literal gods, worshiping the cargo dropped from airplanes. When World War II ended, they attempted to recreate the rituals themselves, constructing their own runways and mimicking the gestures, hoping that the giant metal birds would return to drop the valuable cargo they had become accustomed to. It's abundantly clear throughout history, humanity tends to resort to complete takeover, disregard, and slavery when confronted with significant gaps in knowledge and power between men. This enslavement can manifest physically, psychologically, materially, or even spiritually. It unfolded in the distant past, in the accepted historical narratives of academia, in certain contemporary settings, and it will take place again in the future. Following the Gihon flood in 3439 BCE, Enki emerged on the scene, restoring balance between the humans on the surface and those who possessed the power of knowledge. As a result, he became the betrayer, the trickster god who facilitated the rise of humanity from a state of bestiality, thereby restoring balance in terms of power among men. However, Enki's greatest transgression was not just limited to this. According to Sumerian texts, he initiated the mixing of his own bloodline and of his men by marrying the daughters of the Adamu. This marked the beginning of the period of the 10 kings, who were revered as the Holy Dynasty. It also heralded the dawn of the Technolithic era, during which monumental technological structures were erected, including the Great Pyramid of Giza or sites as Pumapunku. As well, the creation of calendars, such as the Stonehenge or the Mayan long count calendar. Later, in 2909 BCE, a lineage of 7 kings dynasty commenced, starting with a matriarch named Alulim. Over time, this dynasty rose to prominence, but eventually became corrupted and stood in opposition to the 10 Kings dynasty. This conflict endured until the climax of the era marked by the Deluge. And during the apocalyptic period of the pre-Diluvian era, the culture of the 10 kings succumbed to that of the 7 kings due to widespread social conflict and upheaval. This is evident and reinforced by the widespread presence of traditions surrounding the 10 kings across different cultures worldwide. From the Dragon Kings in ancient China and the 10 patriarchs of the East to the Neteru in Old Kingdom Egypt, and of course the 10 patriarchs of the Bible, many civilizations recount a period ruled by 10 kings preceding a cataclysmic event, a flood. They equally remember the 7 kings who opposed them. In the end, Enki's teachings to his brethren, coupled with his actions, evolved into what can be described as the antediluvian Word of God. However, as centuries and millennia passed, these messages to humanity were unfortunately misconstrued. Recurring cataclysms, disruptions in civilization, and loss of knowledge led people viewing events through lenses of primitivism and lacking adequate frames of reference to develop entire religions based on these records. They ended up worshipping figures such as Krishna, Vishnu, Buddha, Mithra, Zoroaster, Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Votan, Viracocha, Indra, and later, other savior figures. This connection is further reinforced by the widespread presence of traditions surrounding the Great Flood. The 10th king among the 10 kings was a man named Atrahasis. After the flood, he is remembered as various figures across different cultures: the Sumerian Utnapishtim, the Xusuthrus of Babylon, the Manu of ancient India in Sanskrit and Vedic texts, the Bokika of early America, the Deucalion of Greece, the Nereus in the Aegean, the Fuhi of China, and the Coxcox in Mexico. In our own tradition, we know him as Noah. In all of these traditions, this individual foretold the cataclysm of the Great Flood, saving many who chose to follow him. But how could he have known? What did he understand? To grasp this, we need to examine 2 key factors. First, when the Anuna emerged, they wielded advanced knowledge in mathematics, cosmology, and most significantly, chronology. Secondly, we should explore an often overlooked theory, the Nemesis star theory. In this theory, the solar system is a binary star system, Sol and Nemesis. In this scenario, and according with Sumerian, Babylonian, Assyrian texts, one of the suns collapsed and imploded, leading to the expulsion of the Earth, Electra, Luna, our moon today, Nibiru with his satellites, and Phoenix, all hurtling towards Sol, our current sun. According to the traditions recorded in these texts, Earth eventually ended up orbiting our current sun. As for Electra, it no longer exists. Its remnants sit in the asteroid belt. Luna was captured into Earth's orbit. This transition is depicted in traditions that describe the world before and after the arrival of the moon, characterized by a cataclysm known in those traditions as the Capture Flood. This event is also noted in the Gnostic texts, where from its Greek translation, our world went from pre-Selenite to a Selenite world. Phoenix and Nibiru continue to orbit the remnants of Nemesis, but their orbits intersect with Sol's ecliptic. Nemesis remains positioned far to the south of Sol's ecliptic, maintaining a perpendicular alignment where Nemesis ecliptic crosses Sun's ecliptic almost perpendicularly. Phoenix and Nibiru, known as the great celestial dragons in ancient traditions, are responsible for the cyclical cataclysms that afflict our world. As a demolished world, in the Gnostic trimorphic Protonoia text, Phoenix is described as a fiery, flaming sword in the sky. When Phoenix makes its visitation near the Earth suffer. Also, According to the Enuma Elish, this is an opportunity of great cataclysm where blood rains on the Earth. Phoenix completes one orbit around Nemesis every 138 years, entering the inner solar system during each orbit. However, its appearances do not always result in significant destruction. Some events leave no records, others cause localized damage, some affect an entire hemisphere, and occasionally, the impact in our world is global. Notably, every fourth transit, occurring every 552 years, tends to be associated with major documented catastrophes. This pattern is evident in several historical events. The reset of Adam and Eve in 3895 BCE, the Great Flood of Noah in 2239 BCE, which ended the vapor canopy world, the Ogyges Deluge in 1687 BCE that wiped out Heliolithic civilizations, the Great Mediterranean Dark Age in 1135 BCE, where even the Sea Peoples, referred to today as Atlanteans and Atlantis, disappeared. In 31 BCE, a major catastrophe that wiped out American civilizations, as indicated by the last recorded date on an Olmec plate. Additionally, this year saw massive earthquakes from Greece to Judea, and Rome embroiled in civil war. In 522 AD, massive earthquakes were reported throughout the Mediterranean, struck significant destruction in Olympia, Greece. Mesoamerican histories record a major setback in their civilizations, marked by famine and plague. The Moche culture in Peru mysteriously vanished, which remains an anthropological enigma. European accounts from this year describe two dragons battling in the sky. These were sightings of Phoenix and Nibiru, both present simultaneously above the sun's ecliptic. This year, 522 AD, is also the beginning of the Dark Ages in Europe. In 1626 AD, a severe drought struck Asia and the Far East. In China, this led to the rise of the Manchu people and the collapse of the Ming dynasty. In the 138-year orbit of Phoenix, its most recent visit was in 1902 AD. There are numerous reports and anomalies associated with the year 1902. From the most notable events in May 1902, Mount Pelée on the French Caribbean island of Martinique erupted, killing 30,000 people and obliterating the city and its harbor with a scorching gas wave. Between November 1902 and February 1903, hundreds of millions of tons of red dust fell over Australia, the Philippines, southern China, southern England, Belgium, Holland, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Russia, and also over the North Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Red mud was even reported to rain in Tasmania. In England alone, it is estimated that 10 million tons of this red dust fell. Lowell Observatory reported that a space dust cloud obscured Mars. Shortly after, in September 1903, an eclipse cast a shadow over all of England and parts of the Atlantic. It was noted that this darkness was clearly not caused by the moon. This event mirrors numerous ancient Phoenix accounts which state that the sun darkens when Phoenix appears. As a fragmented world, Phoenix's debris detaches, and some of it falls to Earth during its transit above the ecliptic. The meticulous and passionate researcher Charles Fort wrote about the years 1902 and 1903. I think myself we passed through the remains of a powdered world, left over from an ancient interplanetary dispute, brooding in space like red resentment ever since. Regarding Nibiru, it has an extended orbit around Nemesis of 792 years, staying 732 years below Sun's ecliptic. When it enters the inner solar system, it remains above the Sun's ecliptic plane for 60 years. Being clearly visible during day and night from the Earth, during this period, our planet experiences various calamities such as debris, magnetic flux tubes, thunderstorms, earthquakes, and plagues. The oldest recorded appearance of Nibiru dates back to 3439 BCE, regarding the Gihon flood, where Sumerian annals state that 1/3 of the Adamu population perished. This year also marks the significant emergence and activity of the Anuna, led by Enki, kickstarting civilization thereafter. In 1915 BCE, during the reign of Sargon I of Akkad, when Nibiru ascended above the ecliptic plane, the Babylonians observed the black planet approaching, casting shadows on the earth, spewing fire and lightning, and referred to it as the Tiamat. Egyptians called it Typhon. After its transit, Sargon I was celebrated as the hero who survived and defeated Tiamat. He earned the title Amar-U-Da-Ak, Marduk of Sumer and Babylon, and was later known as Amraphel and as Nimrod by the ancient Hebrews. In 1123 BCE, during Nibiru's transit over the ecliptic, its sighting triggered the Chinese Mandate of Heaven tradition, which declared a change of rulership. Chinese annals report ecological disasters that led to the collapse of the Shang dynasty. With the collapse of the Shang dynasty, the Zhou dynasty emerged by the King Wu of Zhou. Simultaneously, 250,000 Chinese people set sail across the Pacific and disappeared over the eastern horizon to land on the shores of ancient America. These migrants became the Olmecs, who subsequently influenced every Mesoamerican civilization that followed. From 1254 AD to 1314 AD, as Nibiru departed the inner solar system and descended below the ecliptic to begin its journey toward Nemesis, this era became known to scholars as the period of the Seven Comets. Between 1298 AD and 1314 AD, plagues and earthquakes ravaged populations across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. This time is famously known as the Black Death or Black Plague. Reports of that time describe comets and meteors trailing noxious gases, with plague mists reaching the ground after meteorite passages, killing trees, wildlife, and destroying fertile land. The term influenza originated from this period, referring diseases as an influence of the stars. In China and Asia, several instances of daytime darkness were recorded, which were not caused by the moon. European historians described this phenomenon as an awe-inspiring blackness. This period marks the last recorded visitation of Nibiru. The close encounters of Earth with Phoenix and Nibiru, often depicted in ancient Sumer, Babylonian traditions as the powers of light and darkness, serve as the archetypal precursors to a long series of mythological conflicts. Those conflicts include stories such Marduk slaying Tiamat, Thrytaona battling the dragon Dahaka, Mithra facing Ahriman, Zeus fighting Typhon, Apollo confronting Python, Perseus overcoming the Gorgon, Sigurd defeating Fafnir, Beowulf clashing with Grendel, Osiris combating Apep, Indra battling Vritra, or St. George slaying the dragon. In most mythological records, dragons are popular personifications of extreme meteorological phenomena, including darkness, flux tubes, storm clouds, waterspouts, and torrential floods. All originated, most likely, from the influence of extraterrestrial bodies, disturbing the geomagnetic and gravitational equilibrium of the Earth. The event dates on Earth, resulting from the visitations of Nibiru and Phoenix with their respective orbits, provide a fixed timeline indicating that Earth is disturbed at regular intervals. This is the subject matter of calendars such as Stonehenge and the Mayan Long Count, as well as the Great Pyramid. The architect of these monuments was Enki. During his ministry and based on his chronological knowledge, he provided instructions for their construction as a warning and guide to mankind. Stonehenge serves as a lithic calendar associated with Phoenix and Nibiru. The Mayan Long Count, comprising 13 Baktuns of 144,000 days each, concludes in 2046 AD, which is when Nibiru is expected to next appear, marking its first year above the ecliptic until 2106 AD. The next visitation of Phoenix is in 2040 AD, a year that is referenced in many measurements of the Great Pyramid. Other Phoenix dates are also present in the monument. The Great Pyramid remains an enigma because all its rectilinear measurements in inches are divisible by 138, the Phoenix number. In all its precision, the measurements of the monument indicate that it also functions as a countdown of calendars. The great irony regarding these monuments and calendars is that we are witnessing a cargo cult phenomenon once more, where we assume that our current civilization is the most advanced, rather than the one that actually built these structures. Take the Great Pyramid as an example. The adhesive used to fuse together 2.5 million blocks is 1/50th inch thick and still is stronger and harder than the limestone blocks themselves. These weigh from 2.5 to 70 tons each in 204 levels of blocks from the ground up. The monument was encased with 144,000 white limestone blocks, each measuring 100 inches thick. We simply do not have the technology today to replicate such a feat. We can't build with the laser tolerances applied, and we can't even separate the blocks and rearrange them without breaking them. What we can do is speculate, given our current level of knowledge, that some form of advanced technology, possibly akin to 3D printing, was utilized in the construction of the Great Pyramid. Completed in 2815 BCE, has endured through the ages, and its measurements still align with various ancient calendars. This knowledge and understanding of such calendars enabled ancient figures like Noah and others in his time to predict and survive events such as the 2239 BCE Phoenix appearance. Similarly, power plays throughout history were possible, like that of Atreus, that in 1135 BCE predicted the sun darkening by Phoenix, leading to his ascension to the throne of Argos and Mycenae in the Peloponnese. In the same year, the Tuatha De Danann waited, and when the sun darkened, they invaded Ireland, defeating the Firbolgs, who believed their invaders controlled the darkness that blocked the sun. In 585 BCE, Thales of Miletus accurately predicted the darkening of the sun 2 years in advance. When Phoenix darkened the sun in 583 BCE, Thales' popularity soared, and he was honored with the title of philosopher-scientist, becoming the first wise men of Greece. He later became the teacher of Pythagoras. And in the last passage, something extraordinary happened. Right after 1902 AD, society experienced an explosion of creativity, leading to the formation of numerous corporations, institutes, bureaus, enterprises, and companies. All of the Forbes 500, or their parent companies, were created in this period. Many inventions and innovations that we take for granted today emerged with this explosion in 1902 and 1903. It is almost as if someone or a group of individuals were waiting for the phoenix to come and go before unleashing all the wealth and control over the population. A coincidence? You decide. This raises the question, what will occur during the Phoenix transit in 2040 AD and the Nibiru transit in 2046 AD? Can we predict what will happen? We can certainly make an educated guess. Let's examine the life of Abraham for insights. Abraham, born in 1948 BCE, spent most of his childhood in the house of the patriarch Noah. From an early age, he learned about the antediluvian world directly from Noah himself. He learned about the writings of Enki, or the Enochian teachings. These inscriptions were found at the altar of God, in a place called Akhuzan, Giza. Abraham learned that the Great Pyramid was covered with texts on its polished white limestone casing blocks. During his education with Noah, Giza had been submerged underwater since 2239 BCE in what was known as the Triton Sea. In 1899 BCE, an earthquake lifted the North African plate, draining the Lower Egypt region and revealing the Giza complex once again. Lower Egypt, after re-emerging from 340 years underwater and subsequent colonization, was named the Raised Land by its inhabitants in reference to this event. Later, in 1837 BCE, Abraham went to Egypt, where he taught sciences such as mathematics, geometry, and astronomy in the city of Heliopolis. He visited the Giza complex where the Great Pyramid and its casing blocks were being discovered and excavated. Understanding the antediluvian world and the antediluvian script, Abraham would spend 12 years at the Giza site translating the Enochian records. The scholars from Egypt, Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, Aram, Phoenicia, Philistia, Crete, Susa, Anatolia, Canaan, Midian, and from further abroad would see and be allowed to copy what they wished to take back to their countries. The Enochian inscriptions were so vast they required much abbreviation, and this is what is discovered when studying the oldest writings in the world. This had a profound impact on every subsequent culture and religion. Also, Abraham and Sarah became widely known in many countries. In India, they are remembered as Brahma and Saraswati. Early Egyptian priesthoods and beliefs were shaped and guided by Abraham wisdom. During that era, prior to the 1687 BCE Phoenix event, the scriptures in the Great Pyramid were referred to as the Book of Life and the Book of Thoth, another name for Enki. After the cataclysm of 1687 BCE, it became known as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The Old Testament narrative of the Tree of Life and the Tree of Knowledge has its root in the Great Pyramid and Enki's writings. It is also the origin of the Tower of Babel narrative, as the monument lacks its capstone. The scriptures mention that it was rejected by the builders and the pyramid was never completed. After the Great Deluge of 2239 BCE, its knowledge was lost, only to be rediscovered 340 years later in an entirely different civilization context. The priest-prophet Ezra wrote that the knowledge of God was preserved in the 204 books, which is analogous to the 204 courses of the Great Pyramid when the chief cornerstone is placed atop it. Currently, the Great Pyramid has 203 courses of stone blocks. In the Gnostic text, which has its roots in the Pyramid scriptures, it is stated that Phoenix serves as a witness against the powers of darkness and the angels, and that it will endure until the end time. Phoenix is described as a celestial body, a witness in the heavens alongside the sun and moon. This is also the subject matter of the Book of Revelation, which derives from the same scriptural sources. It describes that, in the end of time, Phoenix acts as the last seal of the apocalypse, while Nibiru initiates the trumpet judgments of Revelation. It depicts this period as the final days of the sun, hinting at the return of the vapor canopy. The text states that man will wish for death, but will not be able to die. This is attributed to the effects of a vapor canopy on natural life, which makes everything larger, faster, stronger, and healthier. The formation of a vapor canopy is relatively straightforward, requiring just a handful of underwater volcanoes that are highly active for a few months, which can indeed be attributed to tectonic pressure caused by gravitational stress. Ursula Southiel, the prophetess known as Mother Shipton, was very specific, stating that the first dragon would appear 100 years after a Second World War, and with its passage, humanity would establish new dynasties in former ocean beds that had become dry land. Coastal regions would be significantly affected by Phoenix. Additionally, Nostradamus foretells that in 2040 AD, there will be a decline in Western world infrastructure and the beginning of a large-scale migration from the Western continent to the Mediterranean region. The Book of Revelation also refers to the acceleration of time, a quickening, where 1/3 of the day, 1/3 of the night, 1/3 of the sun, 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars are taken away. This idea is found not only in Revelation but also in the architecture of the Great Pyramid, in its countdown of calendars. It is mirrored in the Mayan long count, which exhibits a collapse of time in 2046 AD with the end of the 13 Baktun. In Ursula Southiel prophecies, where she states that a second dragon will come to finish the work of the first one. In Nostradamus's quatrains, the death of the Western world is foreseen in 2046 AD. Similarly, the Hopi prophecies of the Blue Kachina, as well as the tale of the fall of Wormwood, the Poisoner, both describe an impact event. The Blue Kachina prophecy even specifies that an impact will occur in the North American continent in the Montana Badlands area. The quickening and these predictions convey that Earth will experience a very close encounter with Nibiru, potentially involving impacts from its debris. This near collision is expected to cause the Earth to shift closer to the Sun, resulting in a 243.5-day year with 16-hour days, leading to a significant alteration, a collapse of time and its measurement. Consequently, both ancient and modern calendars will end and be altered due to this quickening, which represent an abbreviation of time. When we review all this information, including the prophecies, texts, scriptures, and historical world events, this presentation aims to provide a glimpse into the last 59 centuries of the world's resets, cataclysms, turmoil, and upheavals. It also seeks to ascertain what might lie ahead for us. We also uncover evidence of a more advanced version of humanity in the distant past. Our predecessors recognized the need to preserve information for future generations. They understood the instability and upcoming events after decoding the inner workings of our reality. They realized that survival would be impossible if knowledge was lost due to resets and cataclysms. And they understood that their state of technology and knowledge would inevitably be lost during upcoming upheavals. Therefore, they decided to encode this knowledge in places like the Great Pyramid and in countdowns like the Mayan calendar. Over generations, some people used that knowledge to determine when to seek shelter underground, surviving the fallout of Phoenix and Nibiru, such as the underground city of Derinkuyu in Turkey, which is part of over 50 underground cities in the area. These ancient underground shelters are discovered all around the world. Other individuals utilized this knowledge to advance their personal agendas, while others used it to provide opportunities for those unaware of our history. As Cicero once said, "The gods give us signs of future events. If we go wrong about them, it is not the divinity, but men's interpretation that is at fault." And in the Gospel of Thomas, the words of Jesus said, "Have you then deciphered the beginning that you ask about the end? For where the beginning is, there shall be an end. Blessed is the man who reaches the beginning, he will know the end." It is clear that understanding our past will provide insight into our future. Today's true elite are keenly aware of the impending events of 2040 AD and 2046 AD. They possess this knowledge and are actively preparing for it. They understand that after this period, a new natural order will be established, much like the Adam and Eve reset did in 3895 BCE. They also anticipate that, as it was before with the Anuna, there will eventually be a reclamation of the world and its survivors, sometime after 2046 AD. The scriptures clearly indicate that this paradigm shift will happen when the world resembles a new Sodom. When we observe society as a whole, what do we see? Schools focusing on memorization and obedience rather than critical thinking, an academic environment that resists and disregards new ideas, a degraded family institution, gender roles that are increasingly reversed, cultural and political agendas that offer little to no benefit, environmental pollution, emotional detachment, a lack of purpose, and ongoing conflicts and war. Today's nation governments are ruling, spending, and acting like there is no tomorrow. As if the goal is, the more dependent, ignorant, incapable, and physically and psychologically unhealthy the population becomes, the better. Maybe because there is really no tomorrow for our current paradigm. And the handlers of our so-called decision makers are acutely aware of this reality. They're simply trying to escape a fate they can't control, fully aware that it's happened countless times before. Our world will be reset, and those underground will resurface with their strength, numbers, and technology intact, positioning themselves as the leaders of a new, post-reset society. Today, they are making sure that when they resurface, they won't find any competition. They'll encounter a population living in small communities, leading a Neolithic or medieval lifestyle at best, and ready to be guided much like it was in ancient history. In the coming years, the softening of the surface will continue and increase, further weakening the world general population. The presumed modern society we live in today is being deceived at the highest level, deeply entrenched in deception, lies, and manipulation. I encourage you to examine this information and conduct your own research into the history of the world. You'll come to understand that the Nibiru and Phoenix history is, in fact, our world history. As the philosopher Franz Boas remarked in the 1819s, record enough facts, and the answers will fall to you like ripe fruit. Or as the modern researcher Jason M. Breshears said, "To many coincidences, exhibit no coincidence at all." By examining this data, you'll also uncover the numerous palindromic patterns, calendrical oddities, and chronological anomalies that suggest the simulation-like nature of our physical reality. This concept is also hinted to in many ancient texts and traditions, where our world is often referred to as the dream world, like the Buddhist term Maya, a spiritual simulation that was understood by our predecessors in a very distant past, essentially rendering all of our physical constants, mathematical equations, and conclusions the outcome of an underlying code, resulting in observations that we interpret as the product of mathematical interactions. But in reality, these are really just the outputs of a designed closed system, which our ancestors deciphered, allowing them to envision both the past and the future, a spiritual simulacrum governed by hidden protocols. But that's a topic for another video. Thanks for watching. And remember, the Phoenix.